So, now then, we go to the... Okay, we're swapping rounds on the next jump. We go to Lord John Prescott, Member of the House of Lords, on climate change and impact on shipping and ports. John.
Can anybody hear me speaking without this? Right. First of all, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to address what is quite an important conference. Now, I know you've been working for about 20 years on this transport network. Britain has not always been your greatest contributor, and I'm bound to say that, of course, I think now we are more European-minded, and I believe for many reasons we'll win the coming referendum. And your conference emphasised how it's important in the global world to have a big European contribution, because without that contribution, we would have not got the Kyoto Agreement, where much of this is now beginning to have an effect. I welcome this opportunity, but I must say, only a day or so I was given this document. You know, the fear of a speaker who's worked out a speech, then reads a document saying everything you've said is a fear I think every one of us had. So thanks very much for Josie to doing that. And I'm desperately now trying to cover some of the arguments that are involved relevant to what I want to make as a contribution about the Humber and the corridor. So I'm pleased to be here. Perhaps with, I should say, of course, I'm delighted to be here with Brian. We were both elected, we were members of the European Parliament. He wears rank on me because I was there when it was an unelected parliament in 1940 and 1997. No, let's get this right. Back in 75, Brian came in with the elected outfit, which I never chose to do. So we have that experience together. I've always been in an integrated transport system as the Deputy Prime Minister under Tony Blair. We began to integrate some of our own transportation systems. And I'm here, of course, as a European negotiator, seeing what we were doing and starting in Kyoto. I think the important thing is climate change now is much more important than it was then. Why? Because the science wasn't accepted. The science is pretty well accepted. The fundamental difference between Kyoto, which dealt with industrial countries, is this one is the world. It's global. It's 180 nations, and is accepted the science is having an effect on climate change. Now that means we are introducing into the argument of our transportation systems a criteria which is now climate change. And the interesting point then becomes, which I will review with you, a point we're trying to work on, what are the economic implications for our economies, and especially transport, from a criteria used as climate change. We've emphasised efficiency, effectiveness, and that dominates much of our innovation and developments in our economy. But if you begin to accept there has to be a limitation of carbon because of the consequences of science, then you are beginning to make major changes in your thinking, and it begins to affect the economic implications of investment, and particularly in transport. So really, since I've had this document, I'm trying to talk more relevant to some one or two points I want to make, because I think, again, this document is an excellent one, Josie. I think everything, and I couldn't see anything was left out, except the Humber, which I want to say one or two words about. And that Humber then, within the context of the transportation system, we want to say we'd like to be in on the system. Our kind of transportation system is concentrated through Dover. We're talking now about a northern corridor, a large northern corridor, which is in your plans to develop the connection between Ireland and also into continental Europe. Got to be careful I just don't call it Europe. Continental Europe. And that is not only just a corridor that is going to go across the UK, from the northern part of the UK, as we see here. We also see it connecting to the old traditional route, which was known as the E20. The E20 right into the Baltic area. So we believe that corridor should be in your system. It is another route by which is northern route, with a much congested down in the south as we are at the moment, offers some opportunities. What's interesting about that, of course, they're already required an IMO to meet some of the environment requirements of scrubbing different types to reduce sulfur, etc. So we've got a route that we're talking about which should be added to your thinking, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, what's making these changes, of course, quite considerable, is what came out of the Paris conference. The Paris conference, without going into all the details, I'm sure you know it, what was important on the transportation system is to accept that we have to set targets for the reduction of reduction of carbon. If you're going to do that, then the argument's not solely just about efficiency, that's important, but it's also how a country is able to achieve what it's promised to do in the global negotiations to reduce the level of carbon. So you have to look at some alternatives that begin to give greater importance to reducing gases, and as we've seen with shipping, it may be the type of engine, it may be the type of oil, it might be access, the development of emission-free areas. These are going to affect an awful lot of the transport thinking in this situation. But Paris then did the important thing of making point. One of our big arguments from Kyoto was it going to be legally enforceable? And it was impossible to get the Americans to do it. They couldn't, even Obama couldn't get it through the Commission. China wouldn't follow. So trying to find that global agreement, it had a suggestion that I put to them. Why don't we do like we did in Britain after Kyoto, impose it through statutory legislation? The community is now accepted, not only there's a need for a target, but it has to be enforced within our legal framework. Now that's quite important because you're required now to do something, not because we think the environment is an important issue, it's because we have globally and European decided there will be what we call the independent national delivered contribution. The Commission have accepted that. It is now part of our policy, and I welcome the fact that you are having this discussion here now in order to determine what is the European IDMC, the NDC. So to that extent, that's an important contribution. It comes directly from the conferences where states wanted to make their commitment to reducing carbon. So it has not only a global implication, the commitment of the targets are global, the implementation is national or European. So we agree, and we do within our own kind of legal framework. Now that's going to make a great difference, I think, and using of international bodies like IMO and in aviation, because shipping and aviation, which is tended to be on the side of it, is now right in the centre of it, and will have to make its own contribution by how it plans its transport system as a contribution not only to be more economic and more efficient, which is at the heart of the policy you'll be dealing with, but how does it fit in to meet the national or the European contribution to reduce carbon? So all of a sudden that's quite a major factor. This is change of a fundamental kind. The only thing I can remember one immediate change was as an MP, 40 odd years from my area of Hull, I was very much involved. I had 10 years experience as a seaman, not like Josie, he was a captain, I was only a steward, but leaving it aside. But if you look at that implication then with the tankers, when the tankers were running aground, oil pollution was normal, they had to introduce a global solution with double hull tankers. Now that's quite a change. What's coming from this is a change that will affect every part of the industry and other industries as well. So that is a way that you have a vision for transport, I think, it's dynamic, legally binding, a resilient energy union with climate change framework. Now that's quite a fundamental change. And as I said, this criteria will play a major part as well as the economic. Mind you mustn't accept the argument by making climate change a criteria somehow it's painful, it's less profitable. It is not. There's a lot of work that shows that the economic implications of climate change, very much highlighted by a man called Lord Stern during the 20 years of these negotiations, can be beneficial. I could give you examples of it in time, as we found, because when we imposed the law in the UK on the Climate Change Act under our government, that did have very beneficial changes. Why? Because the industry began to use energy more efficiently than it did before. It begins to change the thinking and the commitment, and that comes from that climate change. So shipping will undergo a considerable change. You've envisaged some of it in the document. I am old, the international body is going to have quite a change in it, and as the document points out, whether it's the engine you're using, the oil you're using, or how you fuel the engine, or the route you're going in, or the even kind of areas you can't enter if you haven't got the right emission, are changes already underway, highlighted in the document and a part to play. So that's what the climate change has done and made those differences. Now, this conference is very important, and you're well ahead of anywhere else, and quite frankly, it's unusual in the sense because Europe has led the way on most of the climate change. We wouldn't have it if it hadn't been Europe making a difference as a global body, as a continental body. Many were against, but Europe kept its faith and wanted to change. And now you're ahead again. This must be the first discussion I know of where they're discussing in the IN contributions what the European contribution will be. Nationally, Europeanly imposed in a way. And I think that's very important for your conference. I just want to make an argument. As a corridor change that we're looking at Humber, that would be environmentally better. It would be a better way into Europe, which is already congested from the south. So you need to put together what are the full implications of that. So just in conclusion, I would say we're interested in the major transport corridors in my area of Humber. Today, the government's announcing under its national devolution, I won't go into comment on that, but on what they call a national, hundreds of millions of pounds are being invested in the north to improve the transport. Not before time, I'm about to say. Mind you, billions are going into London, that's another argument. But at the moment, they've announced now to improve the corridor and the transportation across that. Now, that bridge across Britain is not just between Ireland getting better accepted through UK into things. If you look at what's happening to international trade, it's all on the west side. Liverpool's already building on the super ports a new container thing. So it's traffic that's going to come from the west right over to the largest consumer market here in Europe. So this is a major route in the transport corridors. So of course we're interested to see that. And of course it's the old E20 route. The E20 route, which is very much from the Baltic. So we have got together with some of the Baltic ports now to look at how we might present this as one of our contributions to the actual development of the motorways of the sea. The other part that we've done is to study the economics of the low carbon cities and area. In the last few years, 4 years, we've produced this report by 4 of our universities which says the economics of low carbon cities and the Humber. We believe that we can show that if we put this together not just as a whole port, but as a region and as an estuary, it could be low carbon. It could be an important development as how we develop the estuaries, more than just the ports, but the estuaries themselves. The Humber's about over 1 million people involved, so in that sense it's quite a big and important part. But to do that, we've produced this report. It's called The Economies of Low Carbon Cities. It's what we call a mini Stern review. And I've embodied and worked with 2 colleagues since then, Lord Stern, who produced the first book of the economics of climate change, a very excellent book, influenced the conferences at Paris and indeed back in Kyoto. The other one is Vice President Law, who I worked with ever since 1997 at Kyoto, right through this period. Both of them have come on board to help us develop this column into how you can turn transportation systems and estuaries into what you might call low carbon development. Because that's what we're going to. The rich world has got to produce the low carbon solution. The developing countries have got to find their way through, and we have to help them to move from what is basically high carbon growth, in which we poison the world, to a low carbon world where we lead the way and help develop the rest of the economy. So I see this issue, in conclusion, as a crucial issue on transportation, certainly from low carbon, but connected and can only be done in the European concept. That's why it's so wrong for you. If you look at the areas of the Humber there, it's not just the port at the entrance, it's a whole massive area. And you've got Liverpool over on the west side, it's a super port. We're developing this super port in Holland, the same ideas. So what you've got is a connection of 2 super ports, concentrating not in the efficient, only on the efficient transportation, but how do we reduce carbon? And that's quite a fundamental issue. So in all the research you're doing, in this document, I hope we can make a contribution in that consideration to how we look at what will happen if we change to a low carbon economy with all the transportation systems and 2 Humbers. And that's our hope contribution we can make without securing the excellent work we're doing on these transport networks. So I hope you'll hear more and more of the Humber solution of not only economic efficiency for Europe, but